I'm on a quest to read through every fighting fantasy gamebook. You can check out my intro video up there. Let's talk about Fighting Fantasy number 1, The Warlock of Firetop Mountain. The title basically tells you everything you need to know. There's a warlock and he's in a mountain. Go and explore the dungeon in the mountain, killing monsters, find this warlock dude and kill him, and get the treasure at the end. This has been reprinted a number of times. This is the first edition, which has the wraparound cover. I also have this coloured number edition, so there's the coloured number 1 on the front and a purple spine. I believe this means it's an Australian version, if I'm correct. And you can see here the Australian recommended price, $3.95. And then I also have this 25th anniversary edition, which has a whole bunch of extra stuff in it. I'll go through that later. I believe there were 2 million copies of The Warlock of Firetop Mountain sold, and it went on to be converted into video games, and there was a board game. Now, I've never played those, so I'm not going to be talking about those. One interesting little thing, the later editions have a different dedication. This is for Joanna and Annika, but in the earlier editions, it's Joanna, Ashton, and check it out, I get included too. No, it's not me. This was published in 1982, and to give you some context about the world at that time, the Rubik's Cube was absolutely everywhere. The movies that came out, the big movies that came out that year were Tron, Conan, and E.T. The Commodore 64 was introduced in that year, as well as the IBM PC. CD players came out for the first time. And in the video arcades, Pole Position and Q*bert came out, but most people were playing Pac-Man. And on the Apple II, Choplifter and Ultima 2 came out. What a time to be growing up. I was 12 when this came out. Now, the authors for this first book obviously are Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone, and they basically wrote half each. The first half is by Ian Livingstone, and the second half is by Steve Jackson. There's a river that you get to in the middle, and basically everything after that river is Steve Jackson, everything before is by Ian Livingstone. And you can tell the flavour difference between those two. Now, the cover is by Peter Andrew Jones, and he did quite a few other covers for the Fighting Fantasy series. And this is the only one to get that wraparound cover treatment. All the others did not get this, except for, I think, a couple of the sorcery books. It's a pretty cool cover, really. You get this dragon, you get some wizard. Although, to tell you the truth, apparently this is Zagor, and he doesn't look that scary to me. Now onto the illustrations. They're all done by Russ Nicholson. Now he's an interesting guy. He did the cover for the Fiend Folio, which was basically the kind of UK monster manual for first edition Dungeons and Dragons. He also did quite a number of the further Fighting Fantasy books. So you can see some examples here. And there's all these kind of small interstitial things like the sword. And one interesting thing about this first book is that all the pictures have a caption and the number that it corresponds to. And as far as I can tell, they only did that for the first 3 books. And then they stopped. Maybe they didn't think it was necessary. Brief note on the setting. Obviously, at this point in time, when they wrote this, they didn't have any sort of overarching world. But later books made it clear that it's set on the main world of most Fighting Fantasy books, which is Titan, and it's in the continent of Alancia. Let's talk about new mechanics. Now, as I go through reading all the Fighting Fantasy, I will point out any new mechanics that a book has. Obviously, this is the first one, so just everything is new. The biggest difference with earlier game books like Choose Your Own Adventure is that this one has sections versus the page-based approach, and so that obviously allows way more choices. And then, of course, there's the whole combat system, which I go through in my intro video, so I'm not going to talk about that here. And you have an inventory, so you can pick up things on your quest. You've got items of equipment, you've got gold and potions. And in this book, you have to have a set of keys by the end of the book. Otherwise, you can't unlock the treasure at the end. Now, I'm going to talk just briefly about this special 25th anniversary edition because it has a whole bunch of really cool extras. There's all these interesting details about the writing and the publishing of the first book, like that thing about Ian writing the first half up to the river and Stephen writing the second half. They also talk about working out the combat system because originally they had slightly different versions of combat for the first half and the second half. So obviously they had to resolve that. There's also a picture here of the first draft of the book, which was originally going to be called The Magic Quest, which is a bit dull, really. I think they made a good decision in changing the name. There's also this rough map of the first half of the dungeon, which Ian did with all the original numbers before they jumbled up the numbers. Also, there's this walkthrough of the one true way through the mountain to be successful in the end. There's also a bunch of trivia, which is really cool and interesting. And then there's a list of all the Fighting Fantasy books through the years in the different editions, a list of magazines and games and collectors, bookmarks, all sorts of things in here. And then finally, there's this cool pull-out map. Am I getting that in? That's too big. Let me zoom out. There it is. Very cool. So, how did I go in my playthrough? Well, here is my adventure sheet. My adventurer's name was Kevin the Uncertain. The initial rolls weren't too bad. I got skill of 11, stamina 19, luck of 8. My experience in these books is the skill is really the most important thing. And with a skill of 11, the initial fights were all really easy. I chose a strength potion, but I only had one quaff of it. I'm not going to go into a blow-by-blow. Just some fun things. I walked in on 5 orcs preparing some soup, and I was unlucky trying to escape from them, so I had to fight them. And at one point, I almost got taken out by a bunch of zombies. This book is pretty lenient compared to the subsequent Fighting Fantasy books. There are lots of places that give you back points onto your stat scores. This is my very dodgy map. I did get thoroughly lost in the maze at the end, but I did manage to map it out. And in my first playthrough, I actually got all the way through to the Warlock and defeated him, but I only had 2 keys, so I ended up sitting on the treasure chest and weeping over the end of my adventure. How many sections did I go through? I kept a record, and I got through 261 sections before the end. Onto the death by section. How did I die? Well, I didn't die. I just didn't have the correct keys at the end of the book. So after that one playthrough, I decided I would not play it through again. I'd just read the whole thing. So I went through and read every section. So some comments about the overall design of this book. It's a very good taste of the differing styles of Ian and Steve. Ian is quite linear. He'll have some sort of corridor. There'll be a room off to one side with a self-contained bunch of choices. And then you do that and then you're back onto the main path. Whereas Steve, he tends to be much more complex. There's various paths that you can go, and they can be wildly different. Let's talk a little bit about the story and the theme. As with a lot of dungeons in older D&D, there's actually a lot that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's like, here's a room, there's a monster in it just hanging out. Like, what's it doing there? What does it eat? And so you do get some of that in this first book. But aside from that kind of nonsensical thing, the theme is pretty good, and there's a suitable climax to the whole book. So overall, I give this book 10 out of 10. I mean, you can't really not give this one 10 out of 10. It was so innovative. And also giving this a difficulty score, I would say this is definitely one of the easier Fighting Fantasy books. I'm looking at you, Creature of Chaos. So that's it for my review of the first Fighting Fantasy book. Is there some extra aspect of the books that you'd like me to talk about? Let me know down in the comments, and I will see you for the next video about the Citadel of Chaos. See you there.